And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie. And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. Tonight we're going to do the question and answer session. It's coming a few days before I really wanted to do it, but I got a lot of questions, over 35. I'm not going to get to 35, so what I tried to do was just kind of take as many as I could to answer them, at least the most interesting ones. And a lot of people ask multiple questions, so I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. But definitely on Saturday we're doing Carlo Gambino. That's going to be a big show. I'm working on some guests, so just hold tight on that front. There's some mob news and notes, but I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to save that for Saturday. In addition, anytime we do this Q&A, you can definitely hit us up on Facebook or on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Give us a like. You can check me out on YouTube as well at Mob Talk Radio. Give us a subscription. Like a video, hate a video, doesn't matter. We get everything here between death threats and compliments. So with that, I kind of want to get to the questions because we don't have a ton of time. But once again, I did want to thank everybody for the questions. I sort of definitely enjoy doing this. It's sort of become a little bit more fun than the normal. But I like to mix it up as much as I can. So with that being said, let's start right now. Jack Lamb, a hypothetical for you, Jeff. What if Carmine Persico didn't get life in prison? How do you picture the mob? I don't really think the mob would be really any different. I think the Colombo crime family probably be the same. Carmine Persico still rules with an iron fist. He's never given it up. So I don't necessarily know if at least the Colombo crime family would have been any different. I think he's still running the family. So, naturally his son probably wouldn't go to prison and that kind of stuff. But, who knows? Maybe in a strange kind of way, maybe the Colombos would have been more powerful than they are now, because they're definitely not as prolific as obviously they once were. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Yeah, it's hard to play hypotheticals with a situation like that. Probably a bigger hypothetical would be like, say, Paul Castellano. If he didn't die, what would have happened? That would be a bigger and probably an easier hypothetical question to answer in the long run. Shelly Stevens asks, with all the reality shows that are on TV, did you ever watch The Mob Wives? What is your opinion? Okay. A very strange question. I did not like Mob Wives. There's a lot of things I had an issue with. If you're looking for a reality show that's mob-driven, first of all, you're never ever going to have that, because no made guy is ever going to be on TV in a situation like that. But to call it Mob Wives is a bit of a misnomer anyway, because other than two or three of these young women, they're not really young, but you get the point. Two or three of these women obviously had some real connections to the mob, but most of them, especially Drita, didn't. Lee DiVanzo was a nobody in that life. Carla Facciola's husband was really a nobody in that life. So any assertion that they could have made to really dragged them in. The only one that really had serious mob pedigree was obviously Renee Graziano and obviously Karen Gravano. But Karen Gravano's a disgusting troll. I recently saw on Twitter, it's something that bothered me. She was saying, pray for the victims' families in Las Vegas. How about we pray for Sammy Gravano's victims? How about all 19 of them fucking victims? Why don't we pray for them, Karen? She can't do that. And she was always the one to spew, don't you know who my father is? Who gives a fuck? He's a rat. So as far as that goes in that show, I didn't like it. I didn't think much of it. And our secondary question is, would you ever do a mob reality show? One, okay, just a little information here, something that nobody really knows. I was sort of in talks with someone else to do a reality type of show like that. It was just a very minuscule meeting. It was nothing big, nothing on paper. It was just sort of a synopsis and an idea with kind of a shell story wrapped around it. And I was to be with one, maybe two other people who I'm not going to mention at this point, just because I don't want to get into a whole talking about this person kind of thing on the radio. But the premise was that the two of us would live together, and I was doing radio and combating a certain organized crime family, i.e. the Gotti. So you can kind of know where that's going. But that wasn't something that really interested me. And I think probably the bigger issue, obviously the big issue with that would be, I'm not going to get into that kind of genre to begin with, because what I do is fairly serious, and I try to keep it even keel. And the idea of being on reality TV trying to do this isn't really something that I want to do. Not only the subject material was crap, and it just wasn't something that I really wanted to get into. And her third question was, did you ever watch Growing Up Gotti? Yeah, 2 episodes, and I turned it off, if that answers your question. Wasn't interested in it. I'm sure there are people that are interested in that. Me particularly, I'm not. It just is subject to my opinion and just subject to what we want to watch. So as far as mob reality shows, listen, you can go back to the Chris Colombo HBO thing that he did. That was as close as you're going to get, but then again, that was all scripted. These reality TV shows are scripted. A lot of it's fake. So it doesn't interest me, and it's really not at the top of my list of things to do. Anthony Capiche, who do you think was more dangerous, Ray Patriarca or James J.R. Russo in Providence? Well, obviously, I think that Ray Patriarca was the tougher of the two and the more dangerous. Ray Patriarca was on the commission. Ray Patriarca did have a lot of territory. So at the end of the day, I think the reality most likely is that Patriarca obviously was a lot stronger, but a lot of people don't know who J.R. Russo is. And J.R. Russo was essentially a capo and a consigliere for the Patriarca crime family in 1989. The faction, not the faction, but the leadership was sort of split between Nicky Bianco, and then eventually J.R. Russo gets sort of put in charge of the Patriarca crime family. And a little bit of tidbit in mob lore here is John Gotti is the one who approved the leadership change in Providence, especially when Ray Jr. Was caught up in a lot of indictments. Ray Jr. was always known as sort of a moron and a weak leader, so John Gotti approved Nicky Bianco and J.R. Russo to take over the family. Eventually, Russo gets caught drug trafficking, he basically pled out to drug trafficking, extortion, gambling, murder, etc. Russo's big claim to fame, obviously, besides the way he dressed, which is a little bit Liberace and Joey Bonaducci, he was actually charged. Russo was actually charged in the murder of Barboza, the animal Barboza. And I can tell you for 100% certain fact, guaranteed, that Russo did not kill Barboza. I'm not saying I know, but I'm saying I know. So that being said, Patriarca definitely was the stronger of the two. Let's see what else we have here. William Serio, is there still a crew operating in Baltimore? William, I can tell you for certain, 100%, there is no more crew in Baltimore. Actually, they were active from 1920 to 1990. And they weren't even really their own crime family. What it essentially was there was a crew of about 10 guys that were actually a faction of the Gambino crime family. They originally were independent until Vincent Magano installed Louis Marici as the ruling capo, but for the most part, the Corby brothers ran Baltimore, which was Vito, Pasquale, and Frank. But it was always overseen by the Gambino's and always hovered around 10 members and 50 associates, but they have since sort of become defunct. They're no longer a crime family. They really weren't even a crime family. It was more or less just a small crew operating, for the most part, outside of Baltimore. Okay, David Fitzgerald, God, he always asks the greatest questions. If Roy DeMeo was still around in 1985 with no indictments and was still in Paul's good graces and still had the Westies alliance, do you think Gotti and his factual situation with Paul would have still made a move on Paul? Wow. First of all, I've regurgitated this a million times, but really Roy DeMeo's big problem was he got loose and started killing people at random, did kind of whatever he wanted to, sold drugs, scared the shit out of Paul, ended up kind of getting Paul, well, it did get Paul indicted. I don't necessarily think if Roy DeMeo was still around and wasn't being investigated and Paul Castellano wasn't being indicted, I don't see a situation where Gotti wouldn't have moved either way. I think sort of the non-denominator of that is Roy DeMeo. Gotti did it for a lot of reasons. We've discussed those reasons a million times. And most importantly was, Paul was seriously considering moving on Angelo Ruggiero. Gotti wasn't going to stand for that. And so, Gotti did what he had to do, and the family prospered under Gotti. They made an awful lot of money with Gotti. A lot of the guys were no longer on the street starving. So all in all, it was probably a good move in the sense of financial. As far as, bringing on the heat, it wasn't great. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what happened to DeMeo at that point. Castellano was probably still going to be under indictment anyway because they'd bugged his house. So I don't think that would have changed a whole lot. It might have changed the timing because one can definitely make the argument that if Gotti just held off, Paul was going away for 100 years. But then the concern was, well, Paul's more of a businessman and a gangster, so how long is it going to be before Paul rats? And so, sometimes you don't have that kind of time to sit and wait. David Biddle asks, how many mobsters have actually slammed the fishes? That's funny. I don't know. I couldn't tell you a number. I'm sure it's thousands, and that's not even counting the stuff that happens in Italy or the murders that are happening every day in Canada. So I don't really have a number on that. That sounds like a research project for you, David. Let's see. David Fitzgerald again. In your opinion, who's the most powerful mob family in the history of New York? The Gambino'S or the Genoveses? How does the Chicago outfit compare to those families in terms of historical power? Wow, that's a large question. I think historically, Sam Giancana and the Kennedys is as big as it gets. So I think as far as if we're going to talk about historic in terms of like government, I think Chicago's got definitely New York by the balls. But as far as the most powerful mob family in the history of New York, Gambino's or Genoveses, I think truly the Gambino's are. The Genoveses may have had a little more money and a little more membership, but Carlo Gambino was a genius. He was able to stay off the radar, whereas Genovese not so much. He wasn't able to stay off the radar. Neither specifically was Vincent the Chin Gigante. Eventually it caught up to him. But I think the Gambino's are probably the most powerful, especially when Carlo was alive. I think after he died, obviously, I think the Genovese crime family has been the most powerful since. And there are big comparisons between Chicago and New York. What a lot of people don't know, and people are going to fight me on this, but I happen to know this for absolute truth. Chicago has to pay a street tax back to New York. So people always bring up Al Capone as a good example. Oh, he's the toughest gangster ever. Al Capone did what New York told Al Capone to do. A lot of people don't realize Al Capone was not a Chicago native. He was a Brooklyn native, okay? And he started here on the docks and the waterfront, eventually went out to the Midwest. But Al Capone couldn't just do what he wanted. New York oversaw everything he did, and even to this day, Chicago is still paying, I believe it's 40% tax to New York. So the idea that Chicago is sort of all on its own, their own entity, and they're somehow more dangerous, I don't think is really necessarily the case. But that's in no way, shape, or form to demean Chicago in any stretch of the imagination, because I don't want to upset my Chicago fans. Let's see. Fernando Gavriel. How does the numbers racket work in modern times? Essentially, it works the same way that it did back in the day. They essentially take the purse from a horse track, which is put into the paper every day. and everybody bids on the last three numbers of the price at the horse track. So it's very much the same in terms of how it operates. But the days of like guys standing on the street corner and the runners are sort of over. It's still there, but especially with the American lottery now, and essentially you can play the numbers legally at a 7-Eleven or a fucking bodega. So once the government makes that sort of legal, it doesn't really change the fact that the mob still does it. It's just not the nickel and dime or the penny or the penny numbers racket that used to be such a profitable moneymaker for the mob. The mob is involved in so much more these days. It's not so much, you always have your traditional rackets, your prostitution, your gambling, loan sharking, shylocking, which is the same thing, extortion, et cetera, but a lot of wire fraud, a lot of computer fraud, stock fraud, pump and dump schemes, stock fraud schemes. Those are really... along with drug trafficking, are really the major things that are going on these days. The numbers are still there, but it's as long as the government can get, their nickels and dimes and dollars off of the numbers racket they have on the corner stores, then it really, the mob has a hard time infiltrating that. The only difference is for $1 you get 500 with the mob, so it's a little different in terms of the payout. And I'm sure that there are people that still actively play, but I just don't. And I could be wrong, but it's as long as these bodegas and the little small convenience stores are doing it, it's not a good enough investment for the mob anymore. And that's just the way it kind of is. John Spencer Lanners, a quick rundown of made guys in each family, and please just not the New York families. Okay, so you want a quick rundown. So let's give a quick rundown. This is mob membership. These are made guys. Genovese crime family, 220 made men. The Bonanno crime family, 110 made men. The Gambino crime family, 200 made men. The Lucchese, 90 to 110 made men. Colombo's, 90 to 110 made men. The Patriarcha crime family, 50 made men. The DeCavalcantes, 40 to 50 made men. Detroit, 20 to 50 made men. Chicago, 40 to made men. Philadelphia, 70 to 75 made men. Kansas City, 20 made men. Cleveland, 50 made men. Louisiana, 35 made men. Buffalo, 20 made men. St. Louis, 10 made men. Milwaukee, 40 made men. Dallas is unknown. Los Angeles, 10 made men, which Los Angeles actually has Gambino representation out there, and it's believed there's only 10 to 15, but I think 10 is probably closer to it. The Trafficante crime family in Florida is absolutely dead, and Florida is always considered an open territory, so at any time there could be anywhere from 50 to 100 made guys there, just depending on who's there and what family. The Gambino's have a really big stronghold down in Florida. The Rizzuto's, which controls Montreal and Toronto, has 20 made men but 900 associates. So what you can see there is, well, they're not. First of all, everybody's getting killed in that family anyway, but the 20 made men with 900 associates, they're very careful about who they make there, and they don't have a history of informants, and that is very, very important. The Catroni crime family, who operates out of Montreal and Toronto, it's unknown how many they sort of have. Andrangheta, which is an Italian sect of organized crime. They're everywhere. The UK, Europe, the United States, Italy, Canada, they have 6,000 made men. The Camorra, which is organized crime based mainly in Naples, 6,700 made men. The Puglian mob has over 3,000 made men, and that's over in Puglia in Italy. So as you can see, there's a lot of made guys. There's a lot going on. But I did want to talk about Chicago for a minute, because 40 to 50 made men is incredibly small. I don't think Chicago has ever been that small in the history of the mob. I think if you go back to the 60s, 50s, and 40s, Chicago probably was 5 times that size. At one point, I think the Chicago mob probably had close to the same amount of membership as the other 5 families in New York did, but times are different. Times have changed. Not to say that Chicago, in any stretch of the imagination, is dead. They're not, but the numbers are just different. especially with indictments and stuff like that's going on these days. So that's pretty much the rundown of all the made men, and that's as of 2017. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, John K. Prosser. His question was revolving around Billy Bats, and the question that he asked me was, is Billy Bats a fucking ghost? Does he even exist? I can't seem to find a picture of him online. Billy Bats, yes, was a real person. His name was William Benvena. He was a made man killed in 1970. In 1959, Benvena became an associate of the Gambino crime family. In 1961, he became a made man. He was friends with John Gotti. He was a street soldier and protege of Carmine Fatico. In 1964, Benvena went to sort of do a drug deal for Joe Del Vecchio in Arreste Abamonte. And essentially what happens is he gets pinched, gets arrested, gets charged, and gets convicted to 6 years in prison. As he gets out, he goes to the Suite, which is owned by Henry Hill on June 11th, 1970 in Jamaica, Queens. And if you've seen the movie Goodfellas, you know what I'm about to talk about. Billy Bats walks in, busts Tommy's balls, about to get that fucking shine box, spit shine Tommy. First of all, that story's not true. A lot of people continue to paste the Frank Vincent meme of, so go get your fucking shine box. Well, the truth is, that's not even true. That story was invented by probably Henry Hill, Nick Pileggi, and Marty Scorsese, but I can tell you for certain that that absolutely never fucking happened. What the real beef was, and this is what a lot of people don't talk about, the beef wasn't with necessarily Tommy DeSimone. The beef was with Jimmy Burke. And the reason why he had a beef with Jimmy Burke is because when Benvena went to prison, Jimmy Burke took over his humongous loan shark racket. So when Billy Bats gets out, or Billy Benvena gets out, he goes to Jimmy Burke and he wants his loan sharking racket back, which was making hand over fist. And Jimmy Burke essentially said, go fuck yourself. So Benvena, who was a made man, shouldn't necessarily have had to go over his head to anybody, but because Jimmy Burke was a very tough individual and didn't fuck around and didn't mince words, he went to Joe Gallo, who was his superior. And Gallo essentially didn't do anything about it. He didn't want to get involved. Look, the guy went away. You lost your rackets. It's not our problem. It's sort of kind of yours. And Joey Gallo, first of all, and this isn't crazy Joe Gallo we're talking about. And the thing is especially with Jimmy Burke, he's making all this money. Nobody's going to step on his toes. He's making too much money for the Gambino's, for Paul Vario and the other families, and nobody's going to go after him. But once Jimmy Burke found out that Benvena went and complained and bellyached to Gallo, Jimmy Burke, that was it. Fucking Benvena had to fucking go, and that was the end of it. There were two theories that actually came out about the Tommy DeSimone murder. So what ends up happening at the Suite, nobody's ever going to really know. But for the most part, what is true is that they have essentially beat him to death, stabbed him a bunch of times, shot him, threw him in the back of the trunk. He's still alive. They stab him, shoot him again, and then they bury him on a property of somebody that Jimmy Burke knew. Problem was, a couple months later, he finds out that his buddy sold the property. They got to dig the body up. So that part of Goodfellas is true. But a lot of people have suspected, and a lot of people have said over the years, that the reason why Tommy DeSimone was killed was because they held him responsible for the Billy Bats murder. Well, it was Jimmy Burke who fucking killed him, not Tommy DeSimone. So it's sort of hard, especially when Gallo knew of the situation. It's kind of hard to believe that the mob would single out Tommy for that when they know he didn't do it. But there were two theories, okay? And the first theory was that Paul Vario was banging Henry Hill's wife, and apparently Tommy DeSimone had tried to rape her. That's bullshit. That's not true. Never happened. But I believe part of that theory. The second theory is that John Gotti had Tommy DeSimone killed because Billy Benvena was whacked, and also because Ronald Jethro was assassinated. Now, Gotti may have been upset about those things, but nobody was going to step on Jimmy Burke's toes. I hate to say it, but that's just the reality of the situation. So here's what I really do think happened. First of all, Jimmy Burke killed Tommy DeSimone. Don't get it twisted. Don't believe Goodfellas that he got picked up to be made and that Jimmy Burke was sitting in a diner and he gets the news, oh, he's gone, he's gone. He slams the phone down and starts crying. It's complete bullshit. Never happened. Fabricated. Not true. And part of the reason why Tommy DeSimone had to go was, I believe, in part, Paul Vario was definitely sleeping with Henry Hill's wife. Tommy was getting reckless, but also taking into consideration as well that Jimmy was whacking everybody that had anything to do with the Lufthansa heist. Tommy DeSimone was on coke. He was getting mixed in with the wrong people, talking too much. And essentially anybody that Jimmy Burke owed money to as a result of that heist, he wasn't going to pay, he was going to kill. It essentially came down to, I personally believe, that Jimmy whacked him over the money over Lufthansa. He didn't want anybody to know about it. Didn't want anybody to know Tommy was involved in it. But I think the reality of the situation is that Jimmy knew that for the Billy Benvena murder and for the Ronald Jethro murder, somebody would have to pay. And I think that it made more sense for Jimmy to just execute him so that they didn't come after him. Eye for an eye, one for one, done deal, not a problem. That's the way it went down. John Gotti did not kill Tommy DeSimone. I don't know where people get that from, but it's certainly not true in any sense of the imagination. That was a Jimmy Burke murder. He was murdered in the kitchen of Jimmy Burke's house. That's the truth. Don't believe anything else. Lots of people will tell you other stuff, but that is really the reality of the situation. All right, what do we got next? We have, let's see, Casey McCracken. Can you shed some light on the DeCavalcante's, the DeCavalcante crime family, considering that they were based on The Sopranos? First of all, yes, it absolutely is true that David Chase did take certain items from the DeCavalcante crime family, but as far as being like close to the reality of that situation, it's really not. The DeCavalcante crime family essentially isn't nearly as big as a lot of people suspect. It really hasn't been. So as far as the DeCavalcantes go, at one point they were very big. Their territories were obviously, northern New Jersey, Philadelphia, Trenton, Atlantic City, New York, Connecticut, down in Florida. Several bosses. They had several bosses that controlled sort of the DeCavalcantes back right prior to Prohibition, but they weren't really recognized by the commission in New York until Sam the Plumber DeCavalcante sort of came along in 1964. In the 70s, he ended up getting sent to prison for operating a gambling racket, and then he essentially retired and allowed John Riggi to take over. But the one parallel that you can actually draw between, say, Tony Soprano and Sam the Plumber is both of them were caught on wiretaps constantly talking. Sam the Plumber didn't like anybody in New York, shit-talked a lot of people, and he really was more like Phil Leotardo, the character that Frank Vincent played in The Sopranos. Just didn't really like New Jersey guys, didn't like anything about Jersey. New York was better, and if you take that sort of like archetype and you flip it on its backside, that's what Sam the Plumber was like. He was caught banging his secretary nonstop on wiretaps, caught saying horrible things about Carlo Gambino, and he really thought that he should have been on the commission. And so New Jersey has always taken a backseat to New York, and a lot of that's because New Jersey is a smaller area. In some ways, they can be more ruthless, but as far as being a huge crime syndicate, it's not really the case, at least not these days. And I say that because every single crime family in New York has sort of a crew or a contingent outside of New Jersey. So New Jersey's never really gotten the opportunity to sort of be a powerhouse on its own. I believe, and I could be misquoting this book, if you go out and get the book Goodfella Tapes, nope, that's not it. There's a book, and I think George Anastasia wrote it. I'm not really sure, but it really talks about Wiggles, the strip bar in Jersey and in New York, and it talks about sort of the Sopranos and stuff like that. But I think that David Chase's whole sort of outlook was I'm sorry, and this is going to piss people off, but I think David Chase made the New Jersey crime families look smarter than they actually were. They've repeatedly been caught on wiretaps, can't seem to stay out of trouble. There's always 50 or 60 indicted every time. So the reality is that New Jersey has never really been a powerhouse. Even when Sam the plumber was in charge, they weren't. They never seemed to get the respect from New York. But then again, you're operating in a smaller territory, even similar to like Philadelphia. They're fighting over like 10 traditional rackets, and it's always going to be sort of a volatile sort of powder keg. But the fact that Philadelphia's numbers are bigger than New Jersey's is pretty incredible, because I didn't think that we would ever see again. I didn't think we would ever see Philadelphia overtake New Jersey again as far as membership-wise, but that's what they got going on in Philadelphia. Okie dokie. Richard Smith. Let's skip that one. Darren Vizard. Is there still a commission? Yes, there is a commission still run by the five families. So, yes, that is true. What is the state of the five families currently? We sort of just went over membership. In my personal opinion, I think, let me read the second part of this question, too, because it might make more sense. What is the state of the five families currently? Every YouTube channel says they're on their knees. Is that true? Absolutely not. They're not on their knees. They're underground. The days of the social club, there are some here in New York, obviously. There's plenty of them out there, but it's not the same as it was. A lot of guys are moving out to Yonkers now. A lot of guys are moving out of the city, the Poconos, et cetera, et cetera. So the days of the storefront gangster are pretty much done, with the exception of one person who I'm not going to mention, who I happen to know pretty well. He's very old, and he still frequents the social club, so and Brooklyn. So the idea that the mob is dead, the mob is not dead. It's just different. Like everything else, metamorphosis and everything changes in time. And that's just essentially what kind of happens. But no, they're definitely not dead. And for anybody who says they are, obviously doesn't know the streets. You can change the parameters. You can bring in RICO laws. They just find ways around them. The mob is never going to be gone. The mob will always be here. And in fact, if you look at post 9/11, when the FBI really had to relegate a lot of the task force guys to, Homeland Security and stuff like that, they essentially stopped watching the mob. They always kind of had a pulse on it, but they stopped. And what ended up happening is all the numbers started resurging. So the idea that, 9/11 effectively was good for the mafia. It really was good for the mob. They were able to kind of rebuild the ranks and do stuff. But, it's like anything else. With changing times, you've got to learn how to adjust and beat the law. And they're always going to find ways. But like I said, Medicaid fraud, Medicare fraud, stock fraud, so they're always going to be there. It's just the nature of the business sort of changes every single time. But yeah, they're not going anywhere. The state of the five families, definitely the Genovese and the Gambino'S are the two biggest powerhouses you've got. Colombo's, Lucchese's are dwindling numbers. Florida's all but dead, so Philadelphia's rising. So the mob in general is quite healthy. They got a decent break. But like you see every time, it seems now when there's an indictment, there's 40 or 50 guys arrested at a time, and that's no good. So obviously they were able to rebuild their numbers, but obviously these indictments that come out every 6 months, every year and a half, 70 guys, 80 guys are going away. And when you take those 70 and 80 guys off the street, 70 and 80 guys got to come. So, that's just the reality of the business. Let's see. David Fitzgerald, of Anastasia, Galante, and Vito Genovese, who is the most violent, intimidating, and most feared? That's a really nasty question, because each in their own right was incredibly violent, incredibly feared. Genovese was a nutcase. I think we can sort of take him. I don't know. Galante was a drug trafficker, was ruthless, but I think Genovese and Anastasia were the two nastier of the three. But Genovese was kind of a nutcase, thought he should be the boss of all bosses, was willing to do whatever he could to try to take that over, and it didn't work with him. So I think, honestly, Albert Anastasia was the nastiest. He was involved in Murder, Inc., was doing mob hits at a very young age. They said something like 300 bodies to his name, if not more. So I think of those three, I think he was probably the most violent. He sure as hell was the most intimidating, and I think he was absolutely feared. Otherwise, Carlo Gambino wouldn't have whacked him, or at least set it up to that extent. Anytime you take out a boss, there's reasons for it. But Genovese was too much of a nutcracker. Looney Tunes and Galante, it is what it is. But Galante was a drug dealer too. Same sort of effective thing. But I think Anastasia of the three was probably the nastiest of the bunch. All right, Ben Eberhard. What's your goal with the radio show? Also, are you looking for contributions, and would you want more ads on your webpage, et cetera, et cetera? The goal of this radio show originally, and I've said this before because a lot of people asked how I got my start. I was doing hockey, really, believe it or not. I used to play professional hockey, so amongst other things that I've done in my life. And one of the things was that I did a lot of hockey commentary, a lot of hockey blogging, and I had a very popular hockey show. I was on a bunch of different radio shows for hockey, and I really enjoyed it. But I sort of got, I don't want to say bored with it, but, hockey, you go from literally my season would be effectively free agency in July, take August, September, then you're right back again for October all the way through April, and my team won the Stanley Cup back-to-back, so that's like double time to work, covering trades and stuff like that. And then on top of that, I was doing a hockey blog, running a hockey page, and it was just a ridiculous amount of work. And I sort of had an idea that I wanted to talk about the Mafia in some sort of sense. I still don't think to this day that this is the direction it was going to go, because believe me, I never thought that some of the things that have happened to me would happen, but that's the reality of doing what I do. But originally it wasn't. It was sort of a whim. I was sitting down one day and said, you know what, I know a lot about this subject. I grew up around this kind of stuff, so I'm just going to do a show and just talk and see what happens. You can have some God-given talent, gift of gab, and get on and talk about shit for 45 minutes, and everybody will clap and be happy with it. But it had to have substance, and I had to be careful because and this isn't a secret, but one of the rules I try to keep with myself is if I talk about anything that's updated, anything that's new, I'm very careful about what I say. I know a lot of people in a lot of different places, and I would never want to step on toes. I would never want to get somebody arrested. So what I try to do is I try to keep it as historical as possible. Updating news, I wait till I've already known it for a month or so. Oftentimes, I do know about this stuff weeks before it ever hits the press, but I don't say anything because I would rather the press come out with it first than it doesn't come back on my shoulders, so to speak. But originally, it was always supposed to be a whim, and I threw it up on YouTube, and it ended up being very, very good, and a lot of people liked it. And so I kind of said, well, maybe I'll try this again. And what ended up happening was it took off, and thank God it did, and that's a great thing. But at the same time, that's when the phone rang, and that's when I got the, what the fuck are you doing? Are you out of your fucking mind? Don't you talk about our family? Don't you talk about this? And I'm like, so just to put it in perspective, for people that don't fucking know, is that while a lot of people could sit there and say, oh, yeah, it's easy. You just sit and talk on a mic. There's a lot of preparation that goes into this. An hour show is a 4-hour adventure for me. I have to make sure that I don't mention certain things, don't mention certain people, because I really don't want them upset with me. Not because they would ever do anything, but just because they're my friends. I know them. I have acquaintances, and I would rather respect them enough not to put them in any shit. So I do my best to do that. But the personal toll that doing this show takes on me is something altogether different. And maybe someday I will be able to talk about that. But unfortunately, as we all know, I have a lawsuit going on with some person. I don't want to get into that. But the reality of everything, and believe me when I tell you, there is stuff you guys don't know about with this that is absolutely fucking insane. I wish I could talk about it. I wish I could give you details. But it includes the Gottis as well, only because there were certain things that were said and done in discussions that I can't repeat. They could have some legal consequences, of course, to them. But I lost my family because of this show. A lot of people don't know that either, and I think the only reason why I'm being honest about it is because when I get the hate mail and I get the fucking threats, you bum, you rat, you this shit, first of all, you don't know me, and second of all, you don't know the personal toll that this has taken on me. And I'll be honest, and this is, I can already see the head shaking when I'm about to say this, and the eyes rolling, or my attorney going to call me on the phone, what the fuck, are you nuts? But I will be real honest with everybody, because I believe in being honest, and you know, one of the biggest supports that I have is my attorney, Elio Forcina. He's a great guy. He has gone out of his way to look out for me. He's gone out of his way to protect me. He's invested in my show as far as he loves it, and he thinks it's entertaining and stuff. And he also tells me the legal limits as to what I can do and what I can't do. And he's really gone above and beyond what any attorney should do. For a client. He's a friend, he's a confidant, and I can't think of a better guy to be around. Because when my family essentially said, you know what, we're done, we're not getting involved with you no more, you can't see your nieces, can't see your nephews because of the shit you're up to, because of my personal background with family stuff that I've spoken about from Rhode Island before, Without a guy like that around, life would have been pretty tough, man. A lot of people I grew up with got scared because of what I was doing. They knew my background, they knew my family, and they weren't concerned from that aspect. They were just concerned from the aspect of, is this guy going to come after you? That guy, you know what? Nobody is. And the other person that has been just like incredible to me is Angel Gotti. I hesitate in saying that, not because that's not how I feel. That is how I feel about it, but I have really gone to lengths to try to protect any sort of friendship I have with her. It's not based on anything other than just being friends. We don't talk shop. We talk common things. How's the fucking weather? But she's been incredibly supportive. She knows what I've been through. So for anybody that wants to say I'm owned or operated or controlled by them, because that seems to be like what everybody says, it's simply not the case. It's absolutely fucking unequivocally not true. Angel's a great person. She's a great friend, very close friend, and she supports me in what I do, even though she doesn't like it. But she supports what I do, and so really, when you look at it as a whole, I may have lost a lot of things, but I gained a lot of things from this show. But I got off on a tangent here. But really, where I want this show to go eventually, we're going to do some documentaries. We're going to do some live shows. We're going to simulcast from different areas. We're going to have definitely a more interactive live interaction with everybody that listens to the show, because if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing this shit at all. So definitely my first thing is trying to include all of you in some way, fashion, or form. Let's see really quick. Merchandise. Nah, we're not really going to get into merchandise. I don't think. Who the fuck wants to walk around with a Mob Talk Radio shirt? I don't. If you want a shirt, go out and buy a fucking John Gotti shirt. The ones that, God, I can't think of the website. John's son John, who's making his pro debut here shortly. I want to say like the 27th. I could be wrong on the date. You can check Shadow of My Father page for that. He's great shirts he's selling. Has a picture of a lion on the front that John Gotti Sr. drew, and then on the back is his Team Gotti. You want to buy a shirt, go out and get that shirt. You don't need a Mob Talk shirt. I would do coffee mugs now that I think about it, though. As far as what I expect, I don't want contributions. I don't want money. That's another myth I want to dispel right fucking now. I do not get paid to do this. If anybody thinks I'm on anybody's imaginary fucking payroll, and the pea-brain that keeps saying that is out of his fucking mind. I don't get a dime from nobody. I've never gotten a dime from anybody. Nobody pays me to say what I want. I'm a human being. I just say what the fuck I want. It comes out of my mouth. Trust me. If you see the hate mail, you'll understand. Nobody's going to give me a dime for saying half the shit I say. And then look, it just come on, get real. Nobody's bankrolling me. This is all my own venture, all on my own. The only thing I have is good friends and good moral support. And that's all I really need. So is Mob Talk ever going to go paid? That seems to be the $1 million question. Eventually, we might. I'm still trying to figure out a way of doing this to keep it free, because I think free is better. Free is more inclusive. Maybe some special events and stuff like that we'll do won't be, but I haven't figured that out yet, so don't everybody start unliking and unsubscribing because I just said that. I don't know what I'm going to do. That's going to be months away from now before I decide anything on that. But for the most part, it is what it is as you see it right now. Obviously, I want a ton of subscribers. Obviously, I want to make monies off of this. Who doesn't, right? But I think that there's a time and place for everything. And right now isn't that time. We're just building a base again. So, you know what? At some point, we probably will. But for now, it is what it is. And I don't see it being a venture that's going to be very expensive either. A good example would be Jerry Capisci writes 5 fucking sentences and charges $25 a month or some lunatic fee like that. So I will never do that. The blog is always going to be free. The radio show may or may not be, but that's like not even something to consider at this point. Right now, it's just more important that we get the show going, so to speak. Richard Smith, how much information do you have on Tommy Agro? The only story I've heard is the drama with Joe Dogs Iannuzzi. And you know what? You're right, Richard. That's really the only stuff that is out there. Tommy Agro, first of all, was a soldier. He was never a made guy. So why on God's earth that story really even came to fruition is beyond me. Joe Dogs Iannuzzi, who was passed away in, I believe, 2015, he was the son of a bookmaker and a numbers racketeer. He used to ride with his father in the car to pick up, the VIG money and the loan money. But essentially, Agro and Joe Dogs meet each other in Florida. Joe Dogs knows how to make money. Tommy Agro's interested because Tommy Agro can't make a fucking dime on his own. And that's essentially how their relationship came to be. And at the end of the day, Joe Dogs started fucking Tommy Agro on his money. Tommy Agro gets pissed, beats him half to death. He almost dies. And then Joe Dogs becomes a rat and then testifies against him. Tommy Agro goes to prison, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really, I don't want to get into Tommy Agro too much, but Tommy Agro was a soldier, but he was a scary guy and he was a killer. Don't get me wrong. Joe Dogs is lucky he's alive, but at the end of the day, neither one of them really on the grand scheme of things were high up on the list, and that's probably why you don't hear really a whole lot about them. Let's see. I think I got time for like one or two more here. I think this is Robert Wilkins. I know this was your question. Okay, here it is. Could you talk more about the Cherry Hill Gambino's? I would love to talk about them because this is a very important topic, believe it or not. It also has a lot to do with Paul Castellano and Carlo Gambino. If you do not know who the Cherry Hill Gambino's are, they were 3 brothers, Rosario Gambino, Giuseppe Gambino, and Giovanni Gambino, or in other words, Rosario, Joe, and John. They came to the United States in 1962 through Los Angeles. After Rosario did a bunch of time in Los Angeles, they ended up moving to Jersey, and they joined the Gambino crime family. All 3 were made by Paul Castellano in 1975. John was effectively made a captain, and his brothers Rosario and Joe were sort of his top lieutenants. They operated out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. They ran a chain of pizza places called Father and Son's Pizza. Rosario and Joe were suspected in a string of arsons in the early 80s. But the real big thing is that they were drug traffickers. They effectively shipped heroin in from Sicily through the Inzerillo, Gambino, and Spatola DiMaggio clan. They smuggled $600 million in heroin into the United States every year. Every fucking year, $600 million in heroin. By 1982, their financial holdings in Sicily were worth $1 billion. So what they were doing was they were taking the profits, dumping it into legitimate enterprises and property in Sicily, and they had a net worth of $1 billion by 1982. I don't know what the inflation would be, but that's fucking insane. In 1980, Giovanni Falcone indicted the Gambino brothers in absentia. So in other words, he indicted them for drug trafficking. They didn't show up, were found guilty. In 1984, all 3 were brought up on charges in the United States for drug trafficking. John and Joe were acquitted. Rosario got 45 years in prison. In 2006, he was released after 22 years and was transferred to the Immigration Detention Center in California because he was getting thrown out of the country. In 2007, an immigration judge ruled that Rosario Gambino should not be deported, essentially because Italy was a shithole, Italy was a hellhole prison. It would be dangerous for him to go there. He'd likely be killed, and he had already done enough time, so that was enough. And effectively that was his decision, but the customs enforcement appealed that conviction or that statement or that decision, and they appealed it and they win. And so he goes to prison. In 2009, Gambino was sent back to Italy and arrested. Okay, let me step back for a second. After 2007, when the immigration judge effectively says, you know what, he doesn't have to go to Italy, fine. So he stays in the United States, okay? A customs enforcement appealed the decision, and they won. So 2 years later, they force him back to Italy, and he's arrested immediately. He was released while waiting for a trial and an appeal. In 2011, he was rearrested, and he essentially appeals it again on February of 2014, and then he was end up acquitted of drug trafficking and freed. So he spent an awful lot of time in jail, was able to sort of walk away from a 45-year sentence for a 22-year sentence. But they were very, 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 very massive drug dealers. Now, the reason why I mentioned Paul Castellano and Carlo Gambino is because of the unwritten rule: sell drugs and die. Bullshit didn't exist. The reason why a lot of guys, and this is what lends itself to Paul Castellano being the biggest pig hypocrite there ever was. Angelo Ruggiero gets caught selling drugs. Talks on the tapes. We've heard it. Those tapes, those fucking tapes. That's all we ever hear. That's all. You know, it's funny because my attorney says to me, them tapes, because I talk about it a lot. The reality is Paul Castellano had those tapes. He knew what Ruggiero had already said. What he was doing was testing Della Croce's loyalty. That's all that came down to. Was he going to kill Ruggiero over it? It would have been null and void anyway because Paul Castellano was going away for a long time for other reasons. The drug trafficking didn't help. But the problem is that Paul Castellano's own fucking cousins were importing $600 million of heroin into New Jersey every year, the United States. So the idea is, wait a minute, you're slapping around Angelo Ruggiero for something he may or may not have done, but your own fucking cousins are doing this on an epic scale. We're not talking a kilo here, 100 pounds here, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, whatever. We're talking about $600 fucking million of heroin. That's like Pablo Escobar type of shit, El Chapo type of shit. This is not like small time shit like Angelo Ruggiero was involved in. So the idea that Paul Castellano was going to be fixated on Angelo Ruggiero over that is kind of bullshit. So I can see from a street perspective, I'm not putting words in John Gotti's mouth. I'll never ever do that. However, I will say I can kind of understand why they said this fucker needs to go. I totally understand it on some sort of street level. He's going to be a hypocrite and bitch about this, that, and the third, but he's got three cousins that are importing $600 million in heroin into the country every year. Are you fucking shitting me? So that's the tie, and that's what made Castellano a huge hypocrite in the mob. Carlo Gambino allowed them to do it. Paul Castellano allowed them to do it. The fact that the Gambino brothers were there and fucking infuriated Anthony Caponegro in Philadelphia, which is one of the reasons why he moved on Angelo Bruno to begin with. Caponegro said, you will not sell drugs, but it's okay if the Gambino brothers, they're here, they can sell drugs. Because they were getting it, because, Bruno's getting a kickback. But you can see the hypocrisy in that. It was okay for Castellano to allow them to do it, but it wasn't okay for anybody else on the street to do it. Angelo Bruno, it's not okay for Caponegro to do it, but it's okay if the Gambinos are here and they do that. The Genoveses also had a crew that were operating out of Jersey that were dealing in narcotics as well. So once again, the hypocrisy in, I don't care if you do it, just don't get caught, give me the proceeds. But I think on a bigger scale, from a street scale, the idea that effectively Paul Castellano would tell Angelo Ruggiero he was a junkie, an idiot, a moron, a troublemaker, and all these things that Paul Castellano said. Yet his own cousins, $600 million, 1982. You got to figure inflation. That's like what, $3 million or $300 million now, or excuse me, $600 million. So that would be over $1 billion a year. It ended up being $1 billion a year estimate. So what is that? $3 billion now? Get the fuck out of here. So you can see the hypocrisy. There's a lot of hypocrisy in that life. So I've effectively went through all my questions a lot quicker than I thought I was going to do. But I wanted to just say kind of in final is that I appreciate everybody listening to the show. feel free to ask me personal questions. I don't mind answering personal questions. What I do not tolerate, what I will not tolerate, is something that I saw the other day. And I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I am going to be vocal about this because it pissed me off. First of all, don't ever fucking send me a message accusing me of siding with John Gotti Jr. Okay, first of all, I'm going to say for the record, I don't know John Gotti Jr. People are going to make those assertions have been made. I can show you court documents where people make those assertions. I don't know the guy. Never met him. You know, that's just the reality of life. Do I know Angel? Sure, absolutely. But the point is that people are making assertions that I'm Gotti's lapdog. I do what he wants. I do what I want. I don't know how many times I have to say that. I don't know why. I mean, first of all, when I speak highly of John, I speak highly of him because of the things I've been told by people who are very good friends with him, people that know him best. And by all accounts, he's a great guy, an honest guy. Why people think he would have control over some little schmuck that does an internet radio show is beyond my understanding. I guess it shows the mentality of certain people. And it's always the John A. Light people that do this. They're the ones that always say it. But the honest truth is that you don't have to take my word for anything that I say. I never lie to you guys. I tell you just the absolute truth. To the best of my knowledge, there are certain things I can't talk about, and I won't just because that's either personal or it's just need-to-know information only. But at the end of the day, don't think for a second that I'm the type of person that's going to allow anybody to control me. My lawyer knows this. Everybody knows this. They tell me all the time, Jeff, Canarsie, you got to knock it off. Got to knock it off. Because I go nuts. Certain people say things and I go nuts. I'm highly defensive and will defend them because of what I've personally seen people do and say. I will always defend Angel Gotti because I see what people say to her. I see the hell that she goes through. I see the horrible insults, the lies, and how the media portrays things and how pundits and the FBI, I've seen it all. I've seen the other side of this fence. So if I'm telling you they're good people and I'm telling you that you don't have to take my word for it, at least do me the respect and not send me stupid messages about what she is, what he is. You know, your opinion is your own, but I'm going to give you some advice. Some of the nicest people in the world you're ever going to meet are going to be infamous for one reason or another. So it's up to you to not believe what you hear. Only believe what you see. And that's the truth. Because I'm going to tell you, and I told Angel I would never say this, and I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to allude to it. The amount of things that she has done for me as a friend, not financially, because people are going to try to slip that in, just from an emotionally, just a friend thing. The amount of help that I've gotten when I was at my lowest because of what's happened to me, they picked me up. You don't see that in the newspapers. You don't see that on Mob Rat's web pages. But that's the truth. They're good people. They care about people. They do all they can for everybody. I could give you 50 fucking instances of stories that I've heard about how they've helped different people. But they're not show-offs. What they're not going to do, like some asshole that I know, or that I knew, is take pictures of them helping people when they know they're fucking not. First of all, you help somebody out of the kindness of your heart, and you don't do it for accolades and press. You do it because it's the right thing to do. It makes you feel good inside to do it. You don't need to brag about the shit. But there is somebody that does that, and he knows who he is. And I think social media knows who he is, and the world pretty much at this point knows who he is. So the bottom line is that they're good people, and don't listen to what you hear. Really don't. Investigate it for yourself. Reach out and say hello to Angel. She'll talk to you. Anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for listening to the show tonight, and we will talk to everybody on Saturday when we do Carlo Gambino.